you're as excited as we are. Fantastic, and this is going to go really well. Firstly, apologies that we're running late. We are still wanting to encompass the 45 minutes scheduled, and the format is going to be that I'm your host for the afternoon, for the next 45 minutes. My name's Mike Cowan-Jones. I am an occupational therapist by background, have been for 30 odd years. I now run a company called Arms Rehab Limited, and we do lots of training in the education, health and social care fields. I'm now going to offer the microphone to each of my panellists in turn. They are going to introduce themselves to you, but I forgot to add one more thing. I have children, and they go through the education system, and two of which are autistic. And on top of that, I've formerly been the chair of governors at a school. So I've got a bit of a vested interest in this afternoon, I'm just letting you know. Okay, so I'm going to start off, and because I'm a traditionalist, I'm starting with ladies.
Does that sound good? Yeah? Hi, I'm Paula Martin. I'm assistant head teacher at Shaley Heritage Foundation. Sounds clearer, isn't it? Yeah. And so I've worked in special education for nearly 30 years. The school I work at is a school for young people and children who have complex neurodisabilities. They're with us from when they're 4 to when they're 19, and we've got some provision up to 25 as well. And yeah, I'm looking forward to the discussion.
Hi everyone, I'm Marie. Let's try again. Hi everyone. I'm nervous now. I'm Marie Martin. Probably some of you all know me as Send Worry and Making a Difference on Twitter. It's not something I decided to set up. I knew nothing about disability until I had my son nearly 20 years ago, and I got thrown into the world of Send. It's been a consistent battle, trying to find provision and fighting with local authorities. So basically now I do some campaigning work for the Disabled Children's Team. I run sessions every Friday morning, live sessions on Twitter Spaces, trying to support parent carers, give them a purpose, give them a bit of support. My child spent time in mainstream, special units, government-funded, specialist, external provisions. Nothing actually worked for him. He's autistic, ADHD, PDA, severe anxiety, trauma and tics, so we've got a cocktail, diagnosed at 3. Been in the system an awful long time, and he didn't want to be here 5 years ago, so that changed things for me, and I decided to homeschool him, and I've based work opportunity, dealing with work opportunity for Zach based around his special interests. And we've opened up channels into people like Costain, National Highways, National Grid, Keltbray, Balfour Beatty. So, yeah, it is a battle, but you can overcome adversity if you try.
Hello, I'm Dana. First and foremost, I'm a content creator, but my background in terms of education, I have a master's degree in accessibility in higher education, and I was kind of led to that because growing up, I grew up in a lower social economical area, so didn't have a lot of access to the pots of money that were available, and that kind of led me to do TikTok, where I make funny skits about the teachers that I experienced at school. If anyone visits my page, a lot of it is glasses on the nose and kind of highlighting the absurdity of the education system in a very comedic tonality.
Good afternoon everyone, I'm Lee Chambers, so I'm an entrepreneur. I run an inclusive wellbeing business based in Preston, the North West. My background's in psychology. I have an autistic son, and along that journey I also ended up with an adult diagnosis myself. I live with a chronic illness, and our company is a cornerstone employer for SEND schools in Lancashire. So we get to see an awful lot of the challenges that the educational systems face, but we try and bridge some of those gaps, create collaborations and really start to think about how we can increase provision from a business perspective where schools are lacking funding and having challenges. So great to be here.
Hi everyone, I'm Alex Winstanley, fellow Northerner. Any other Northerners here? Yes. 2 Wiganers on a pack, didn't know that. There you go. I'm a children's author, I suppose, as well as a social entrepreneur. I set up a social enterprise called Happy Smiles Training. Co-founded that with Hayden, who's not here today, but Victoria is from our team. So please come and visit us. We're just this store next over. You can see some of the books and some of the work that we do there. But as well along that journey, I've been a personal assistant to a lot of disabled young people, as well as being a PE teacher in a SEN core in a school and doing a Masters in SEN and inclusion. So that's my background.
Thank you very much. Ladies and gentlemen, if you do some jazz hands or some other form of appreciation for our panel, I'd appreciate it. Thank you very much. So, to explain the background to this, we don't just make up the questions. What happened at Disability Expo is that we asked a representative panel of the public what questions they'd like presented, and we had many questions. We've managed to fine-tune that down to 4 broad questions that we're going to direct to certain members of the panel. They do not know who they're going to be. Ooh. So we're going to direct them to certain members of the panel initially, and then others will contribute as appropriate. Because of the time, we've got to run through and get these questions out of the way first, and we think they're going to cover most things. We hope they do. But at the end, all being well, we're going to throw it open to you, and that will curveball all of us, because we won't know what's going on. So you may have a question relating to education too. Are you happy with that arrangement? Fantastic. So, the first question. This is odd, by the way. Taking your glasses off to read. The question is, what are the key barriers that prevent inclusive education for students, and how can these barriers be overcome? And I'd like to direct this question initially to Dana and then to Marie. Dana, would you like to respond to that? What are the barriers? How can they be overcome?
So in terms of where my expertise lies, I pretty much always sit in my lived-in experience. And for me, I noticed it at master's level, and I also noticed it as a disabled person. And for me, it was access to assessment. So I was only diagnosed as dyslexic at 18, even though school reports from the age of 6 literally say show signs of dyslexia, autism. So for me, I think a massive barrier is the disparity between different communities and like geographical locations. So I grew up in a lower socioeconomic area, so the pots of money were not a lot. So we didn't get any support in terms of access to assessment. So I was just kind of left, as I put it, on the pink table, where teachers think they're being coy, but they're not. You're clearly getting very different work to everybody else. And as a young child, I had no explanation for that, and having a label to an experience is really important in understanding yourself. So for me, I will always preach that we need to start with having access to assessment from a neurodivergent perspective anyway. It either needs to be embedded into the process where people can self-advocate or parents can self-advocate, because my mum really tried to fight, but we just couldn't afford the private assessment. And I think there's a lot to be said for the first step for getting access to assessment. So that's who was next.
Yeah, I can second that, Dana. Absolutely. After my son going through the educational system, obviously there's a lot to speak about education in general. We've really struggled, and you're right about the assessments. I think the barriers for me come right from the government down, right from the funding, the training, having the process. And do you know what? It's okay. They can do as many green papers as they like, but the Equality Act's already there, the Child and Families Act's already there. We need some accountability to the law. That's what we really need. And without that, I think we're all going to really struggle. And that's what I do, as in send Warrior Mum, speak to the DFE, a campaign for change, because I think without it coming right from that very top, if there's no funding, nothing else is working, and the SEN system for me has been broken and it's just getting worse.
Okay, thank you very much. So we're saying about assessment is so important, but we're coming a little bit from the neurodiverse field as well, known personal experience, but it's also physical disability. At this point, I just want to see if you'd like to contribute, because I know over at Chailey, they do some brilliant work, and I'd just like to explore that a little bit more, if that's okay. Same question, yeah?
Yeah, at Chailey, I think one of the main barriers, this is going to sound quite simplistic, but it's actually, I'm going to say the word time. Time is really, really important. We have an amazing multidisciplinary team around each child and young person at Chailey. So they have their own therapist, speech therapist, occupational therapist, physio, dietitian. We've got all the clinical support. We've got the teachers. We've got the special education assistants. All those interventions, even the feeding and the giving medication, that all takes time, and that's time out of the teaching day. So in terms of actual education, we find that actually there's very little time left, and that, you know, it's one of those things that I think is actually a huge barrier. The other thing is all of those things require a great deal of training, and training our staff also takes them away from the school day. So that's something we're kind of facing every single day, I think.
Thank you, and I'd just like to bring something out there. We are very aware there's a lot of noise going on. I'm going to suggest we might need to speak louder than usual and make sure we've very much got the microphones in front of our mouths so that you can hear us better. Does that work better for you? Okay, so we need to go around and pretend it's a giant ice cream, but please do not lick it, because I don't want to lick it after you. Okay, thank you very much. So some very valid points. It's about accessibility, about training. Were you wanting to make a contribution a minute? I thought your hand went up. Pointing your nose. Okay, fair enough. Thank you very much. Anything else from the others, or can we move on? We will move on. So listen carefully, panel. Question number 2. How can teachers and educators, good word there, educators, receive proper training and supports to effectively cater for the diverse needs of students with disabilities in mainstream classrooms? Alex, I wondered if you might like to make a contribution here. And I was also thinking perhaps Lee, because you've gone and taken things beyond school, haven't you? So Alex, can we start with you, please, sir?
Yeah, hopefully everyone can hear me. It's not hard for a Wiganer to be loud, so... so, I mean, like I said, I co-founded an organisation called Happy Smiles Training, and that's because we don't, as a trainee teacher myself, when I was training, I didn't have any training from anyone with lived experience, so everything that we do is driven by lived experience. The problem is we've still got in the education system, around, going back to the point about training, these tick box certificates that teachers come through and they've not experienced it, so they can do as many certificates as you want, but until you've actually experienced it or really sort of spend time with someone who's got lived experience of all the challenges that's been talked about, then you're going to struggle to really learn. So key is lived experience. I mean, we've done work with university students who have never even had a conversation with a disabled person for whatever reason that is, and that's at university. So imagine when we're into schools and colleges as well. So I think the key is everything that we've got to teach is got to be led by lived experience. That's the absolute key for me, and that's one of the biggest barriers. And going back to that point on barriers as well, inclusion and this sort of training is always a bolt-on process. It's always planned, and then how do we include people instead of thinking like that reverse inclusion model of how do we include everyone at the start and make it a lot easier for yourself.
Yeah, so from my perspective, I suppose meet a lot of adults who their education has significantly impacted them and still impacts them today as an adult, and some of the trauma and the difficulties that they've faced from the very teachers who were there in a professional capacity to help develop them and to create safe spaces for them didn't always happen. And I suppose there's an appreciation there that for a lot of teachers there are significant barriers and challenges. They are taught by a system that doesn't really work around universal inclusion. They learn behaviour management before they learn about differences in learning styles, for example. It's such a challenge. Obviously, not dissimilar to what's been said before, teachers need capacity to be able to understand the people's needs. And you know, when you've got a massive class, when you've got a whole horde of other priorities, that can be a real challenge. Training has a role. Like Alex says, lived experience and stories stick a lot better than facts, data and statistics. But I think as we kind of look at how do we create a more inclusive educational system, there's fundamental things that need to change. And as Marie said, that comes at a policy level. That's not only a policy that's created, but a policy that's actioned. And that's a legacy thing. It's not going to change overnight. But to be honest, there's some great best practice that's happening across the educational system, but it's not always shared. And it doesn't just sit with education. Education needs to plug into all the other institutions that provide support, development and pathways. And by doing that and collaborating, we can actually create more inclusive pathways for everyone, not just disabled individuals.
Thank you. I can see other people very eager to jump in on this, very eager. But just a couple of things to mention. I think this whole thing about training, if we jump in further, it's something we forget, that we need to invest in training all around, isn't it? It's about employers understanding more. We're going to talk about employment in a few minutes. It's about schools understanding more. The National Autistic Society have recently released a report that says the average secondary school teacher gets only half a day's worth of training on neurodiversity, which is not great. But we have to remember it's about partnership working. There is some very good practice going on. But it's about working in partnership between education providers and parents and the young people being supported. On that note, I'm going to hand this over to two more young people. And then I think I would like to bring in the comment from yourself at the end as well, if that's all right. Okay? There you go.
Thank you. Obviously a very topical conversation because we were all like, I want to speak. So I just wanted to highlight that when I was doing my Masters, I looked at a lot of data in and around perceptions of neurodiversity and disability. And I think we do also have to have the wider societal conversation in and around that, in that there is a massive disconnect between academic research and on the ground. Like, there's a lot of practices that are completely outdated that research tells us it's not right, but it's still in place. And there's also a lot of social bias in and around neurodiversity and disability. And unfortunately, the way the system is built at the moment, you're kind of left at the mercy of the goodwill of teachers. So I can pick out traumatic experiences, but I can also pick out the teacher that spent 6 hours after school tutoring me every night at GCSE level. But that was at the mercy of her own time. So I just kind of wanted to highlight the disconnect and how I think there needs to be more concrete structures in place to kind of really bring that data and what we're learning in academic spaces and really put it on the ground, because there is amazing disabled researchers doing such fantastic work in and around it, but it's just not implemented. And I think there needs to be some kind of translation process between that.
Yeah, I'd just like to add to that, and especially what you said about the lived experience, because I've found through meeting people on Twitter, I've met lots and lots of different parent carers, parent advocates, who are absolutely phenomenal. So if there's anybody out there, whether it's an educator, business, reach out to these parent advocates who will come into your schools, who will talk to you about their lived experience. But most importantly, just listen to parents of their own children, because they're always the best advocates and they're the experts on their own children.
Okay, loud voice. Like that? I don't come from Wigan, that's the problem. At Chailey, I work in a special school. All of the training that we provide for our teachers, most of it is done in-house. We have a very small field to choose from when it comes to recruiting our teachers. I don't think there is good teacher training out there for special educational needs and disability. I don't think it exists. What I would say is we need to actually think about what special educational needs and disability means. And teachers cannot be experts in all of those things. It's huge. It's absolutely huge. I mean, in my career, I've worked with autistic students. Now I'm working with students with profound and multiple learning disabilities. It's completely different, and all of those conditions can overlap. So I think it's really important to be clear exactly when we talk about teacher training, be clear what we mean by that. And I also think let's not forget the teaching assistants in this, because they are absolutely crucial to what we do now in education. At Chailey, we've renamed our teacher assistants. We call them special education assistants now, okay? Because we realised that the TA title doesn't match what they do. They're giving meds, they're giving basic nursing care, they are feeding, they have to be knowledgeable. We train them in-house in all sorts of different disabilities. What they're doing is life and death. They're not teaching assistants, they're specialist assistants, okay? And to be honest with you, I wish we could pay them more. But that's not my call, by the way. But I want us to think about teaching assistants when we're talking anything about teacher training. We need to include them.
Thank you very much, panel. Just to pick up on that, we do recognise that a lot of parents and a lot of young people are struggling to get the education that they deserve, and that should be theirs as a right. We know that. What we're trying to balance up is the fact that it's not as easy as they're the good guys and they're the bad guys. There's a complex area that we need to negotiate together when we can, in partnership. That's the point. And just a slight correction, we gave a generalised term. There is a brilliant training company. There's a gentleman called Alex, who you may want to meet, and he will gladly chat you through his stand, which is, of course, Happy Smiles Training. Is that right? Happy Smiles Training. And I've got to say this, and I know I'm biased, but we also do lived autism awareness training as well over at Arms Rehab Limited. That's my daughters, who are both autistic, and they took the lead on this, so we'll be happy to work together at some point and see where we go. Moving on, because this isn't supposed to be a plug, so I do apologise. Moving on, got some more relevant questions. Are we up to question number 3 already? Goodness me. So what strategies have been successful in promoting the transition from education to employment for disabled students, ensuring they have equal access to career opportunities? Because I think we need to pause and just take a step back and think, what is the purpose of education? Is it merely to pass exams? Or is it to learn life skills? Does it have to be about that certificate at a certain age, or should we be more flexible about it? And for this, I'm going to direct it to every member of the panel. This time I'm going to start off with Lee.
So this is one of those questions that's always going to get a bit of an interesting response. So for me, obviously the pathways from education into employment are really important. If we look at kind of inclusive hiring policies, a lot of companies are still really behind the curve. It's lovely to have a disability confident employee certificate, but what are you actually doing to create conditions where, like we just said, disability is an absolutely massive prism. Everyone's uniqueness and individual circumstances are different. It can be very difficult to create some elements of universal inclusion to ensure that everyone gets the opportunity. But one of the big things in my world is I went out into employment and I didn't stick for very long in employment because it just was too rigid. It was like school, but even more rigid than school was. And I ended up in entrepreneurship because I was able to actually adapt, accommodate some of my own challenges, bring other people around me to offer that support. And entrepreneurship isn't for everyone. Employment isn't for everyone. And I like to think that when we're thinking about this as a topic, it's actually thinking about how people can live with purpose, how people can find communities where they belong. Because education is an opportunity to learn, but learning never stops. Learning is a lifelong discipline. And sadly, people who don't seem to learn or be seen to learn in a very traditional, rote type of memorise this and regurgitate it on a paper. Here's your piece of cardboard, off you move on to the next phase of life. I will find a whole range of people who are disabled, and they learn an awful lot of different things, and are always learning, and are actually incredibly adaptable, incredibly resilient, and actually they will outlearn other people. You'll be massively surprised. So I've just waffled on for about a minute there. But my opinion is the pathways need to be there for those who want to do that. The opportunities should be there for everything from work experience to being able to actually go out and see what employment is like. But actually thinking employment isn't for everyone, but everyone should have a place where they can do something that's meaningful to them.
Would you mind repeating the question? My processing has gone a little bit.
Certainly, that's a fair comment, and that's a reasonable adjustment to make. So it's what strategies have been successful in promoting the transition from education to employment and making sure there's equal access. So how have people moved from education to employment, and what's worked?
Well, again, I always step forward with my lived-in experience and mine only, because I can only speak from my voice. But for me, being a content creator, I've seen a massive opportunity in social, particularly around disabled creators, disabled influencers. There is a massive market in and around that kind of upskilling society, whilst also like earning an income. I mean, for me personally, I think there is, in terms of pathways, I think we can learn a lot from the arts sector. So my background is traditionally as an actor. Can you tell? No. It's traditionally as an actor, and I think I naturally gravitated towards that because the practices are inherently inclusive in a lot of different ways. It's a lot of self-expression. So I think it's kind of coming back to what you were saying about acknowledging the different learning styles. And I always find it really interesting, just as a side note, about that kind of retention in terms of learning, because statistically speaking, I think it's only like 20% of people that actually learn in the way the system is built. And like first and foremost, it is visual audible. It's not like read and write. So I think adapting learning styles, being open to different career paths, and also supporting disabled people in making their own path. Like I always think about my dad, who's a salesman, and he had no idea when I got into social what I was doing, but he found a way to support me in doing it, and he's still like gobsmacked that I'm somehow able to earn money from posting a TikTok. But I think like supporting that process and listening to the neurodivergent or disabled person about where they fit in society and what they have to give. Also, last note, I think the disability sector is growing. I mean, look, and I think a lot of disabled people and people that are in that space who have experience of disability have a lot to say in terms of innovation and around disability, and obviously we've got the Purple Pound. So I think encouraging disability as a path as well, and that kind of activism sector is also really important.
Yeah, you're absolutely right, both of you. From my point of view, and dealing with my son who's now 20 and been homeschooled since he was 14, and dealing with the companies that I do deal with, we're not quite there yet regarding employment. I think they're scared. I don't think they're sure how to approach this. I guess it's a similar situation to the schools, because everybody's unique. Everybody's got different needs, everybody's got different wants and desires. So I based my son's work experience around his special interests, which is great if you're autistic, because he's got an absolute phenomenal ability. He knows everything about electricity pylons and motorways. You know, when we went to National Grid, there's not anybody who knows as much as he does. But we're still struggling to make that connection into employment, and obviously the support that he would need to be able to access that employment. So I think we've a real way to go, but people are starting to listen, and I'm saying to them, we need to stop ticking the boxes now. You know, you're all signed up to these mental health acts and disability acts, and you need to start walking the talk now, because we've done our bit, we've shown you how it can be done. Now to take that into employment, because I'll be honest, if my son hadn't have had me, I think he would have fallen off the edge of the cliff and just been left. You know, people are happy to, local authorities, etc., are happy to leave them there as long as they're not costing them money. They don't really care, and that just needs to change, because I believe that these neurodiverse minds, neurospicy, whatever you care to call it, are our entrepreneurs of the future. And we need them, and we need to find a way to include them. It's not rocket science, is it? If one company took on one person, then what a difference would that make? Because the DWP statistics are that only 2 in 10 people who are autistic have employment, which is just not good enough. We need to do better.
But I think that companies, in my experience, get very scared when they hear the word disability, because then they start thinking they've got to start making doorways bigger in their buildings and all those things and start putting lifts in. Okay, I think some education around what disability actually is and what that really looks like. I think education with employers about that would be a very good thing. I have to say at Chailey Heritage, none of the kids there will go on and be employed, but I loved what Lee was saying about leading a meaningful life, and that's what we would hope for our kids. But again, it always, I'm bound to say, it always comes back down to education.
Thank you. Alex.
Yeah, really great points. It's quite hard to follow, but what I will say is we're really proud as an organisation that we take a bespoke approach to supporting anyone that joins our team into employment, and 50% of our paid employees are disabled people who have long-term health conditions. 100% of our organisation have indirect to direct lived experience of disability, and I think that comes from that bespoke element of support. It's been said quite a few times, every single person's different, and I think from that transition from education to employment, we're too ready to just put people in a box, and it just doesn't work for everybody.
Thank you very much. You've been such a patient audience. For those of you that are waiting for the next talk, I do apologise, we're running behind schedule today, but you're very welcome to be part of the education panel, so thank you for coming along and supporting us. We greatly appreciate it. We're on to the final question now, and the final question is, how can educational institutions, what a lovely word, institutions. I prefer organisations and providers. I didn't actually type this, I have to point this out. How can educational providers foster a collaborative and inclusive partnership with parents, guardians and caregivers of students with disabilities to ensure that their needs are effectively met and supported throughout their educational journey? Now, I think this is quite an interesting one. It's likely to raise a few points of view from you guys, the audience, but I'm going to deliberately tease it out with the 3 people on the far right, because we have an education provider, we have someone who's definitely been through the education system and studied it, and we have a very passionate mom who has done all she can to support it. So I'm going to start off with passionate mom, and then we'll see where it goes to from there.
Oh, thanks for that. Oh gosh, how do we foster it? I guess it goes back to listening to parents, and parents are the experts on their own children, and we're all on the same side. I think that is the most important message that I want to get across. If a parent comes in, I see on my Twitter every day, there was a particular course saying, how to harness the angriest and scariest parents. And it's just not acceptable, is it? Because if you look at a mum like me, for example, we're just exacerbated. We've probably been going 15 years to no avail, hitting brick walls continually. At the end of the day, we just want our children to survive and to be happy, to be the best they can be. Nobody's going to be all things to all men, and I think we have to understand that too. And I think it's looking at people from an absolute individual way. But please speak to those parents, because all they want is for the children to be happy and for them to have a fully inclusive future, and I don't think that's too much to ask for anybody.
actually, this is part of my job that I love the most is our work with parents. It's also the part that has probably caused me the most stress, I would say, over the years. So it's very much, there's a lot of reward, but there's a lot of stress as well. I think it's really important as educators that, there's a number of things actually, I'm going to have to give a lengthy answer to this one. Okay. It's really important that we always, no matter how difficult the situation, no matter how difficult the conversation, we need to be understanding the parent's perspective as far as we are able to. Okay, we need to be thinking about the journey that the parents are on, that they are still on, and the battles that they have faced and the battles they're expecting to face. I think we need to be really, really honest with parents, because there are certain pinch points in education in which they need an awful lot of support. Those are usually centred around transition. So it'll either be a move into the special school or the school of their choice, or it will be a move into adult services. It will be before a continuing healthcare assessment. It will be some kind of funding battle that they're going through. Those pinch points are where parents need an awful lot of support, information and guidance. To give those things, we can come up with things that work, but we need to be continually reviewing and developing that, okay? Because also what works for one family won't work for another. All families are different, they're all in different situations. And sometimes those conversations can get very passionate and very heated, and that's absolutely fine. That's what we're there for. I would also I think it would be very helpful for parents if they can be appreciative of, and this is a school thing, but the reports we write. The annual review report that we write is incredibly detailed, and it feeds straight into the EHCP, okay? That provides very useful, I'll say evidence, I mean ammunition, for parents as they go into tribunal or whatever assessment they face. So understanding the reports, who they're written for and what the language is there for, I think would be very helpful for parents. I'll think of something else in a moment, but I've dried up for the moment, so I'm just going to hand it back to you, Mike. All right. Oh, I'm going to go to Dana.
Hello. So I think there is something to be said for looking back. So as an autistic adult that's able to look back, I think bringing alongside parents, bringing autistic adults or disabled adults into the conversation to kind of feed back that lived-in experience alongside parents. Either that all the relevant parties have the relevant information, because obviously if you've had a mental health crisis the night before and you come into school, I mean, I can tell you I'm probably not a nice person to be around being autistic when I've gone through that. So I think that would be my point, is having a collaborative space where these different organisations and different people can support the child or the teen or the adult.
Yeah, so just to kind of build on Dana's point around collaboration, having to continually repeat things to different organisations is an incredible frustration. We live in an incredibly interconnected, world where things are plugged into each other, things are integrated, but actually a lot of these systems are very disparate, and without those integrations it causes significant challenges, because you find yourself as a parent, from my perspective, having to tell 5 different people the same thing to try and get them to join up. I suppose my kind of desire for the future is that there's a wider inclusivity thing considered within this. Cultural considerations, socio-economic considerations, both from a perspective of thinking about parenting the children and the educational system, because different cultures have different norms and different stereotypes are applied. If I think about, as an autistic black individual, I only got diagnosed as an adult, and part of that is because of the lack of research on ethnic minorities and women in neurodiversity, for example. But in disability research as a whole, it's massively underfunded. Studies are cut short. I see this in my work. It's incredibly frustrating. And I think, from my wider perspective, we can start to think about some of those cultural nuances that when we're dealing with parents from the educational perspective, some of those socio-economic aspects where there are economic barriers to accessibility. If we can start to think about it a little bit more holistically, I think we can build a better system together.
Amazingly, a Wiganer has not had anything to say. Cheers, Alex. Well, you only did one more point. Oh, shall we allow her? Yeah, okay, then there you go.
The talk's nearly over and I'm warming to it now. I just wanted to pick up on what you said there, Lee, about saying the same thing over and over again, and services working together and sharing information. A parent I was working with recently, she'd been described in a social worker's report as being difficult, okay? She said to me, I wasn't being difficult. She said, the social worker asked me to talk her through my daughter's birth, her daughter's birth. She said, I've talked about that a million times. It's not something I want to remember, okay? And I'm being asked to describe it again. It should be on the records. I shouldn't have to keep going over again. Bearing in mind her daughter's 18. So in terms of services being joined up, and I'm not being critical of anyone, you know, we're all doing our jobs here, but I just think it's services working together and sharing information with all the you know, the constraints around that. I think that's incredibly important.
Final comment.
Okay, yeah, I hear exactly what you're saying. You know, the code of practices say it once. If I've said it once, I've said it 5,000 times. You know, we probably would have had 6 social workers in 8 months, and that every time a social worker came in, you'd have to say it again and again and again. And actually, what we also need to acknowledge is the fact that it's quite traumatic, our journey. You know, 20 years worth of trauma and battles is enough for anyone. And, you know, we get labelled. You know, you see it in your SAR requests. I'm labelled as being difficult. You know, I see the way they talk about me. But at the end of the day, I'm a parent and I'm not going to stop until my child gets what he needs to thrive. And that's it, really. But I've really enjoyed chatting today.
Right, well, ladies and gentlemen, I know we've had some challenges in the microphone with people hearing us. I do apologise. You have done brilliantly to listen to us. We've got about 5 minutes left. Has anyone got a burning desire to make any questions or comments? I'm going to start off here and then move to you. Is that okay? So, are you comfortable talking into the microphone?
I'll try my best. Oh, it's really weird hearing yourself. Okay, so I wanted to ask about how education can be shaped in a way which doesn't promote the use of masking for disabled students. So, you know, we're talking about the mental health impact. I think I've had like severe anxiety since I was 8 years old. Things like probably heavy suicidal thoughts since I was 10. Why? Because ever since I was a child, I have been working and to think about my every move, the way my voice sounds, the way I speak, the way I react to appear normal in a way which now I get the amazing compliments from non-disabled people. Oh, you don't look disabled, which is fab. But I wanted to ask, like, how can we shape that? Because of course, like, education covers both non-disabled students and the disabled students in the mainstream education. Because then after you've got adults which are left with, as we mentioned before, severe mental health challenges where they don't accept themselves and they have to keep doing it and then try to learn to unmask, which is incredibly difficult. So, and I think also it's worth mentioning the impact as well for women, where we do have those additional pressures as well, where, for example, certain students, like for example, let's take ADHD, certain behaviours are more accepted when you're a young boy than a young girl. Thank you.
Thank you so much for that question. Does any panellists really want to answer that? Because I know who I've got in mind otherwise. You want to go for that, do you? Okay, all right, go for it.
Yeah, I hear every word you're saying. It's a big problem in mainstream. You're expected to fit in. I've heard teachers say, well, he's got to fit in. I've got 30 other kids to deal with. I've had teachers say to me, oh, look, you can't even tell anymore, look. You know, I've had teachers who don't understand what masking is. You know, and the fact that children struggle to stay at school all day. And the lack of coiled up spring, and when they get home, you know, all hell breaks loose. Parent goes into school the next day, they talk to me who's not particularly educated about masking, doesn't understand it, and this is not aimed at your school because your school completely understand. And if we could all go to a school like that, our children would all thrive. But unfortunately, the reality is that there isn't that amount of specialist provision, which would be fantastic if it was. But again, I think it comes down to training, understanding, taking things on a one-to-one. And if a parent's coming into school the next day and saying, you know, this is my child, then the worst thing is that parent blame gets apportioned. Well, we don't see it here, it can't be happening. And they're just setting up the child to fail continually, and it's traumatic right the way through. I don't know what the answer is, to be honest. I don't, but I always put that point across. I think it's just more resource, more funding, because without it, we haven't really got anything. And more training and more lived experience panels where people like yourself, you can explain exactly what you've gone through and how it makes you feel. And I think that's it. It's got to start with lived experience and feedback.
Okay, I'm just conscious of the time. You can come and talk, by the way. If any of the panellists, are you happy for people to come and talk afterwards? So come and talk to us. We're going to loiter. We'll hang around there somewhere. Buy us a coffee. We're more than happy to chat. Okay. There's another thing to mention very briefly. Paula McGowan, the Oliver McGowan Trust has now made mandatory training on autism awareness and learning difficulties compulsory for the health sector. They're campaigning for the education sector. And I think the more we get that awareness out there is great. And the other factor to say, I Matter. It's not just Disability Expo, but there's a whole movement going on from Expo to Expo. There will be more expos, all being well. And the I Matter movement is about putting people with disability, including neurodiversity, at the heart of things. I'm conscious of time. I'm very sorry, but one more question, because I did promise it you. Are you happy to talk into this microphone? Thank you very much.
Hello, yes. Just interested from your perspective as a teacher, vice chair of this special school, and when you're talking about teacher training, we are the trauma-informed school. Every single member of staff has got that training. It's been delivered in-house because there hasn't been anything external. That's broad. What we used to call it today is now the specialist staff on the training service. And it's made a world of difference. And we also deliver training to parents as well, and how we can work together. One barrier, I don't know if you've found this, is that as soon as there's a trauma happening with a young person, all good services outside of that school shut down. And those teachers are expected to be a mental health worker, social worker. How can we as parents and others influence change to show local authorities that they've got to step up?
Question, how do you get the other authorities involved to step up to do what they've got to do?
Thank you. I'm assistant head, not head teacher, but thanks anyway. Yeah, okay. Everything we've got at Chailey is on site. All those services, all those therapies are on site, so we don't encounter that particular problem. I would say the only thing I can say is it's got to be about engagement from the people that have got influence over policy. That's the only thing I can recommend for that. I don't know, just as an aside, you mentioned training for your specialist support assistants. Our difficulty with that, and I don't know if you're encountering this as well, but our difficulty is that we can't, it's actually releasing people to go to that training. You know, they're contracted for a certain amount of hours, and actually releasing them for the school day means that even that is really hard to actually put into place. In terms of your work with the services and getting the services you need, it just comes back to, I would lobby, I would make sure that, you know, I mean, you're governor, yeah? So yeah, so we're talking to your local MP, if you've got a board of trustees, anybody like that? I'm not going to be able to, I don't know why I asked that, I can't hear you, of course I can't. But as a maintained school. So work with the externals, you know, in terms of anybody who can influence policy, get them engaged and make sure that they understand your position.
Well, friends, I think we could have had a big discussion instead of just a big discussion. Thank you so much for your patience and time. Just a couple of things to sum up with. There are some excellent training providers out there. Come and see Alex on his stand, he'll tell you about it. Come and see me and my daughters on H22 Arms Rehab Limited, we're there as well. But the big thing is we're in it together. We all matter, I matter. So we'll keep that going forward. Can I ask you to do two things? Your jazz hands and appreciation for the panel, please. and your jazz hands and appreciation for yourselves. Thank you so much indeed. Enjoy the rest of Disability Festival.